We are in the New Testament, 1 Corinthians chapter 8. 1 Corinthians chapter 8. And we really kind of just got started into chapter 8 last time. And so we will look at this, really this what appears to be the second question that they ask. Remember, Paul begins this letter talking about a communication that he'd received from Chloe's household. And what Chloe had said, it just stated a problem, not really ask a question, but stated a problem and saying there's divisions, and maybe explained what those divisions were or the root of them, because Paul addresses that. But then starting in chapter 7, remember, verse 1, he says, "Now concerning the things of which you wrote to me." Now, a couple of assumptions, so I'll get over here in my opinion box. A couple of assumptions. One assumption is that this is a separate a separate letter, if you will, from the one of Chloe's household. Now, it was said before, whether that was mailed in the same envelope or sent separately, we're not sure, but it seems to be we have a communique from Chloe's household. There's divisions here, Paul, help us. And then a more generic communique from the entire congregation that says, Paul, we've got questions. The first one, of course, had to do with sexual relations and marriage, chapter 7, verse 1. Now concerning, chapter 8, verse 1, now concerning things offered to idols. And again, I sound like a broken record, but some who weren't here when we discussed that, I take that now concerning in chapter 8, verse 1 to be an abbreviation of what he says in chapter 7, now concerning the things of which you wrote to me. And he's going to use that phrase a few times, again in chapter 12, twice in chapter 16, now concerning. And here's the next thing that you asked me, things sacrificed to idols. Now, we know from our study of the other epistles in the New Testament, even the book of Acts a little bit, that this was an issue in the first century, the idea of things sacrificed to idols. There was the church, almost every church, if not every church, in the New Testament in the first century that we read about was a mixed congregation, mixed in the sense of some Jews and some Gentiles. And that rift that existed deals a lot of again, the New Testament, Acts and the epistles. Do they have to be circumcised, keep certain parts of the law, the Jews were saying. The Gentiles were having some problems wrestling with how to come out of the world and what do we leave behind. And so the Gentile seems to be, at least in 1 Corinthians 8, the problem existed in the mind of the Gentile. The Gentile who'd come out of that and then now couldn't make a separation between full-on worshiping at the idol's temple and just eating something that had been maybe sacrificed, or maybe had been sacrificed. A couple background things here, that these idol worship would involve, again, the sacrificing of these meats, but they may have, for lack of a better way of saying it, in one of these feasts that they had, they sacrificed these animals and they may have some leftovers. We killed too many goats. Well, take those other goats out to the marketplace and sell them. And so it was possible that when you went through the marketplace and bought a goat to go home and eat, that's a goat that had been sacrificed to an idol. And so the Gentile mind, they said, well, I can't participate in that. That's the same thing in their mind to go into the temple. And then some seemingly had taken it, well, since I don't know, what if it had been sacrificed to an idol? So you can imagine being this Gentile Christian going through the marketplace, and here's a guy selling goat meat, and you walk up to him and say, has this goat been sacrificed to an idol? Well, being the good salesman that he is, he's going to say, what do you want me to say? Are you an idol worshiper? You love idols? Then yes, it's been sacrificed to an idol. Are you a Christian? No, this hasn't even been anywhere near. And so you just didn't know. And so the Gentile would just say, okay, I'm going to be a vegetarian. I'm not going to eat any meat because that meat may have been sacrificed to an idol. Now, let's talk about another thing. the ancient mindset. It was a Jewish mindset, apparently, as well as a Gentile mindset. I meant to Google. I don't remember the year when germs were discovered, but our understanding of their understanding of science in the first century is that they weren't aware that something could be contaminated based upon germs, but they certainly had the mentality that something could be morally contaminated. Remember the Jews, the Pharisees that came to Jesus condemning his apostles because they didn't wash their hands before they ate. That wasn't a hygienic concern. It was, again, a Jew goes to the marketplace and he picks up something to look at it and to decide whether he wants to buy it. Well, what if a Gentile had touched that first? Now you got those Gentile cooties on you, that you've been morally contaminated. So you have to wash your hands, because now if you eat, you're going to swallow those Gentile germs. And you've got sin inside you, it seemed to be the mindset. And so that idea of moral contamination was a concern. And that seems to be a concern here. Here's this meat, it was sacrificed to an idol. And so even if you take it out of the idol's temple, third degree removed, it's still got that idol stuff on it. It's still contaminated. And if I eat it, I'm eating idol. And so there seemed to be that idea of this moral contamination mindset. And so Paul says, concerning things offered to idols, we know that we all have knowledge. And now there, maybe he's talking exclusively to the Jews. Jews, we know better. We know that. But knowledge puffs up and love edifies. So remember, we use that play on words there. Knowledge puffs you up, builds you up, but love builds up somebody else. And so we talked about a broader application of that. Is sometimes, um, correcting somebody when it doesn't matter, just to show that you're smarter than somebody. All that did was puff you up. It didn't help that other person. In fact, it may have tore them down a little bit when you embarrassed them in front of everybody that they didn't know something that you knew. And so be careful. If anyone thinks, verse 2, I'm going to ask for help from your translation. The New King James says, if anyone thinks that he knows anything, he knows nothing yet as he ought to know. That's one of those almost like a riddle kind of phrase there. Does anybody have a translation that makes that a little clearer?
New American Standard is, if anyone supposes that he knows anything, he has not yet known as he ought to know.
Okay. So kind of similar to New King James. Anybody have the ESV as their choice? Glenn, read that.
If anyone imagines that he knows something he does not yet know as he ought to know.
Okay, he does not yet know as he ought to know. I guess if in Ken's redneck translation, we would translate verse 2, you're not as smart as you think you are. So you have this knowledge that something offered to an idol is nothing, but be careful how you use that knowledge. You might tear somebody down unknowingly or without purpose. But also, you don't know everything either. And so maybe the whole point of that, not that there's some more revelation about to come about meat sacrificed to idols that's going to change all of that. I don't think that's his point at all. I think he's saying those that had knowledge were right about meat sacrificed to idols. But the point seems to be is that we're all ignorant in something. You may have a PhD in this one subject, but there's a guy over here that knows something about a subject that you know nothing about. You're not as smart as you think you are. I'll illustrate that, and I should have Googled it. I can never remember the name of it, but I'm a big sports fan, and I think I know sports inside and out from, little league baseball all the way to the Olympics. Last trip I took overseas, I turned on the TV, and there was a sporting event on, and I thought for sure they were just making it up. But I Googled it, and it's an actual sport of two teams, two people on each team, and they're each holding hands playing tag. Uh, it's a big sport. I'll Google it in the intermission to tell you the name of it, but it just like I never even heard of that, and it's a big sport. They had national championships on the television. And it's something I never even heard of. So again, you're not as smart as you think you are. You may know everything about meat sacrificed to idols, but in another area, you could be humbled. And so be careful with your knowledge. But, and now here's the contradiction to that, or the counterpoint to that. But if anyone loves God, verse 3, this one is known by him. Seems to me that he's saying that's the knowledge that matters. And he's not discounting knowing stuff. We have to know stuff in order to know God's commandments and obey them. But he seems to be saying that the real knowledge is knowing God and God knowing you. That is, this personal relationship is important. Now, it's not a either or. They're not mutually exclusive. But he's saying that if you have this knowledge of facts, but you don't know God and God doesn't know you, then again, you're not as smart as you think you are. You haven't figured this out. Therefore, so now he gets to the first point was just be nice. You smart people, be nice to the people that don't know that yet. Now he gets to the issue. Verse 4, concerning the eating of things offered to idols, we know, here's what we know, and again, the we here may be limited to the Jews, are certainly limited to those that know. Not everybody knows this, because if they did, it wouldn't be an issue, would it? But we know that an idol is nothing in the world, and that there is no other God but one. We don't have a time to get into a deep discussion of idolatry, but let's do a little. I think it's worthy of a cursory discussion of idolatry. We know you study it two different ways. You study Old Testament idolatry and New Testament idolatry. A lot of similarities, but some differences. The similarities in Old and New Testament is that, and we know God in Isaiah and other places mock this principle that you go out and you get a piece of wood or a piece of stone or metal, whatever it is, and you fashion it, you make it, and now you worship it. Makes the point you got that backwards. You're the creator worshiping the created object. And in true religion, the creator is worshiped by the created. But you've got that completely backwards. You're the creator. You created this object, and now you're going to go down, bow down to it. And it doesn't talk. It doesn't move. Doesn't do anything in that. Now, where sometimes I think we make a disconnect, I think the overwhelming majority of idol worshippers, Old and New Testament, knew that that graven image wasn't really a god, but that it represented a god. And so this is the idol of Zeus, whatever, and they recognize that's not Zeus himself. Zeus is out here somewhere, and we've built an image that represents him. And so that's why God made it such that it wasn't just a law against an idol for a foreign god. God didn't even want an idol for him. Don't make even a graven image that represents me in that. And by the way, we'll talk about this a little bit in the sermon, or something that alludes to that. I find it interesting that when God did use some third party object, if you will, to represent himself, it was never a static image. It was never a stone image or a wood image. It was fire or wind. Sometimes God appeared to Moses, to Abraham, to the children of Israel as fire. And so he used something as a representation of an earthly thing, as a representation of him, but it was always a living and active. You see the difference between fire and a stone. That here's something that's living, something that's moving, and can correspond and react to different things. And so what Paul is saying here is, and what really the Old Testament prophets were condemning, is that idol, that graven image, and you think there's some God behind it. Well, in a sense, they would say that graven image is the perfect representation of that God, because that God can't speak. There is no Zeus, there is no Diana, and so Diana can't talk, can't move, and so that graven image is the perfect representation because it it can do the same thing Diana can do. And so they attach those. They're the same in the sense that neither one of them can do anything. And so he's saying we know that an idol's nothing, that graven image is nothing because there's nothing behind it. To illustrate that, if you had some Confederate money, it's no good other than maybe a collector's item because there's no government behind it. That piece of paper is only something if there's something behind it. It's not the fact that it's a piece of paper that says 100 on it that makes it worth $100. It's just that there's a government and a treasury behind it that's saying, we say it's worth $100 and we'll stand behind it. And so he's saying that idol is nothing because that graven image is nothing because there's nothing behind it. For even if, verse 5, even if there are so-called gods, whether in heaven or on earth, as there are many gods and many lords. So even if they were real, and there's a bunch of them out there, fake ones in name only, yet for us, there's only one God. So even if there were other ones, we wouldn't regard them because we serve the only God, of whom are all things, and we for him, and one Lord Jesus Christ, through whom are all things and through whom we live. And so there's no such thing as other gods. And even if they were, we would still be loyal to our God. And we would just serve him, and the other things don't matter. However, now he began that by saying in verse 4, we know that an idol is nothing. But now he's going to say in verse 7, however, there's not in everyone that knowledge. And so it seems like if this was a sermon, we would, let's say it's a sermon and it's being preached to men. And so we would just say, women, you can tune out for a little bit. This is a sermon just for men, or this point's just for men. So he's just talking to part of the congregation when he says we know. And I think these next couple of verses are going to show us that when he says we know, that he was talking to the Jewish half of the congregation. We know that. But, and he's pointing over to the Gentile side, not everybody has that knowledge. We know that, but not everybody grasps that. For some, here's the others, for some, with consciousness of the idol, now eat it as a thing offered to an idol, and their conscience, being weak, is defiled. It seems to me, in fact, your translation may bear it out this way, that what he's saying here is that some, being accustomed to that idol, now eat it. They have it in their mind that an idol is something. They've lived their whole life that the idol is something. And so now when they eat this meat, there's just always that, I just can't separate that. And we can kind of see that, can't we? Certain things, songs are that way, and I think food is that way, that can easily attach itself to a memory. We all have certain foods, and you eat that food or even smell that food, you think of somebody. You may think of your mother or grandmother or aunt who made that dish. And that was her signature dish. And so now every time we have that, I can't help but think of, Aunt Martha. She always made that dish. And so every time I eat that dish, I'm going to think of Aunt Martha. And so that was the idea, that they had, every time they ate that, they were worshiping an idol. All this other gross, disgusting stuff was going on. And so now, even when I smell that meat being cooked, my mind goes there. And so he's saying, Jews, we know this, but come on, give them a break. Be kind about this. They have that attachment. You don't have it. You smell the meat, you might think of something being offered to God at the temple. Or you may just think of nothing, just have secular food thoughts about it. But realize these people have a different background than you. And when they think of meat and eating meats, they're accustomed to it being attached to an idol. And their conscience, now it's weak, it hasn't been properly trained, but their conscience is just saying, idol worship, I can't do this. And if, again, we attach this to Romans 14 and 15 that we studied just recently, here's this idea that even if something is okay and it's allowed, but if you're violating your conscience by doing that, God doesn't approve of that because God knows how important that conscience is. Verse 8, food does not commend us to God. For neither if we eat are we better, or neither if we do not eat are we the worse. And so it doesn't matter, Jews, he seems to be saying. Don't press your Gentile brethren to eat meat. It doesn't matter if they want to be a vegetarian. They can go to heaven as a vegetarian. That's fine. Leave them alone. It seems to be the point. More talking to, just like he does in Romans 14 and 15, talking to the strong as opposed to the weak. Larry?
It's really hard for us to appreciate, how much difference there was from one set of views to the other between the Jews and the Gentiles and those groups. That you had one group that grew up worshiping God and Jehovah, and had all this background knowledge from the Old Testament, and then another group that had never heard of him until they heard a sermon from Paul or something, and that they were trying to share service together, and the eye rolling must have been constant from the Jewish side
Yeah.
of the building, and it's so easy for them to get up on their high horse, and like, goofball, why would you think that? But there's a ready-made split waiting to happen.
Yeah.
Half the congregation would be like, well, I'm tired of you being, so on your high horse at me. I'll just go over here, and have my own group, and keep them together in a unified setting. That would have been really difficult.
Oh, it was a tenuous relationship at best. And yeah, I don't think we have anything in our experience to really compare it to apples of how disparate, how disagreeable these two groups were. Everything about them was different in that. And so, what's the answer to that? Patience and understanding, he seems to say. Now, we'll add this asterisk. I don't think it needs added, but we're going to add it anyway. He's not talking about compromising the truth, compromising the gospel. Here's something: God doesn't care whether you eat meat or not. It's okay to eat it, it's okay not to eat it. So this isn't an issue that, it's okay. We'll just agree to disagree on whether Jesus is the Son of God or whether baptism's important or not. No, this is a matter of something that doesn't really matter. And in that regard, the only way we're going to get along is patience and understanding. So food doesn't commend us, for either we eat or we're the better, nor if we do not eat are we the worse. But beware lest somehow this liberty of yours becomes a stumbling block to those who are weak. Just as we observed in Romans 14, fair or not, the overwhelming majority of the responsibility to unity lies in the lap of the strong. The strong ought to bear with the scruples of the weak, is how Romans 14 begins. And that's just the way it is. You can say it's not fair. A lot of things in life aren't fair. It's not fair that Deidre and I had two kids that mooched off of us the whole time. From day one, they didn't contribute any money to this. That's the way it is. We were stronger and they were weaker. That's just in the same way in a congregation. There's going to be some who are stronger in their understanding of Scripture, have a better conscience, and then the weak and the strong are going to have to carry the lion's share of that. That's just the way it is. Hopefully, those weak will become strong and will learn out of that. But you can't use that I've got this liberty, it's allowed, and say, now I'm going to use it as a stumbling block or allow it to be a stumbling block. For if anyone sees you who have knowledge eating in an idol's temple. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. I have a difficulty with this section of this chapter. If anyone sees you having knowledge eating in an idol's temple, will not the conscience of him who is weak be emboldened to eat those things offered to idols? And so just be careful, he's saying. If they see you eating something offered to an idol, then they're going to feel pressured to eat something offered to an idol. Now, as I already said, eating that something offered to an idol wasn't bad. And so that you haven't messed them up by making them eat meat that was bad for their system. But what you've messed up is their conscience. They still think it's wrong, but if you're eating it, then I need to go along to get along and I'll eat it. Now, here's my difficulty in that. I can understand the principle, but he says if he sees you eating in an idol's temple, not just eating the food, but eating in an idol's temple. When we get over to chapter 10, beginning, we won't discuss that yet. We'll get there. We get to chapter 10, verses 14 through 22. He seems to be saying, don't eat in an idol's temple. He seems to draw a distinction between eating the meat in an idol's temple from eating meat outside of that temple that may at one point have been associated with that temple. That part I can easily distinguish. Okay, this I'm eating this meat that I bought in the marketplace. I didn't ask. Maybe it was involved in that, but that doesn't involve. I'm not worshiping an idol when I eat this hamburger, and so it's not got nothing to do with it. That part I can understand. But now he takes it further and says, if he sees you eating in an idol's temple, is Paul condoning going to the idol's temple and participating in some way or another? I can't see that he is, because again, in chapter 10, just 2 chapters away, he's seemingly going to say, don't do that. We need to be separated from the idol's temple. And so we need to reconcile those 2 chapters. And John's going to do it for us right now. John?
It seems like the person who has no problem whatsoever, like his conscience is fully clean, and maybe there's like a deal or something, like I can get a better deal on a meat, go into the temple or something, like get a better deal. I don't have a problem. This place is a joke. I'm just gonna go in here and get some of this meat, But then, the person who has a weak conscience would see that and be like, oh, I guess it's okay to eat the meat that's been offered to idols in the idol's temple or something, and they don't have that. They just don't have that same level of faith. Their conscience is still impacted by those kinds of things. And whereas the other person who walks right in doesn't even care that it's an idol's temple.
I'm just there for the meat. Yeah.
He's just there for the meat. He doesn't. He knows it's just a big joke. There's no real false god. It's just just a sham. But he's gonna go in there and take advantage of it.
I can't worship a God that doesn't even exist.
Right.
And that's not what I'm here for. Yeah. So that's a possibility. It's also possible that in chapter 8, verse 10, that he's using a bit of maybe hyperbole there. Did I steal your thunder? Go ahead, Adam. Make your point.
Taking the point as far as he possibly could, as far as, okay, if it's debatable, then here's the extreme example. But,
yeah. And to the Gentile, and this may be part of that, to the Gentile, that's the same. Going to that idol's temple and engaging in every sinful activity. And here I am at home eating that meat that may have been involved in that. In the Gentile mind, that's the same. Now, the Jewish mind, again, here's the knowledge. We know, that's not the same thing. But to the Gentile, he sees you eating that meat. You're in the idol's temple doing all those, getting drunk, illicit activities, all of that. And so the Gentile can't separate it. And so seeing you eating meat is eating meat. And, maybe that's it. There's this, and we have to always allow for that. There's this gap in our understanding, gap in our knowledge, gap even in our language. I'll give you a funny illustration of that. When we lived in Birmingham, we were driving down Center Point Parkway, and there was this massive church building. Think kind of on the tunes of James River over there, just a massive building. And Blake's in the back seat, and they're at that point where they really start noticing things. And he looks out the window and he goes, "Wow, look at that church." Because he never seen anything like that. Look at that church, he said. Well, Deidre thought this was a teaching moment, and she said, "Well, now, Blake, I don't know that I would call that a church." Kind of drawing a distinction between the church of the Bible and that. And Blake goes, He could read, it said church something there. He goes, huh? He says, well, you call it a restaurant. I'm going to call it a church. So, like, it's a church, Mom. It's got a cross on it. It says church on the sign. It's a church. And so he totally missed her point. That he was, yes, it's a church, but it's not the church we read about in the New Testament. Was her, maybe she was trying a little too early in his developmental phase there. But there, it's that way among Christians, isn't it? Here's this Gentile who thinks you're worshiping an idol, you're engaging in all of that when you eat meat at home, and the Jews going, no. And so he's saying, Jews, be careful. There's the gap in our understanding here. And because of your knowledge, verse 11, because of your knowledge shall the weak brother perish for whom Christ died. This is an abbreviation of Romans 14, isn't it? That's his whole point there, is that you're missing the big picture here. The big picture is not eating of meat. The big picture is your brother's relationship to God. And so here it goes back, here ties in. In fact, if it's all on one page, it's hard for me to do. This is on 2 pages in my Bible, but I would circle verse 11 and draw a line back to verse 1. We know that we all have knowledge. Knowledge puffs up, love edifies. Here's how the knowledge puffs up is you're making your brother, you're not building him up with your knowledge. Now, we didn't think of, and this isn't Paul's point, but we can make a secondary point. We need to think of ways we can use our knowledge to build people up. There would have been a way, wouldn't there, for those Jews to patiently, understandingly help those Gentiles. Now, it may take a while. Not going to be like tell them that fact and they're going, oh, okay, well then, hand me the meat. No, but you could, with your knowledge, you can teach gently, patiently, meekly, teach them and help them. And that way your knowledge can build somebody up. So again, Paul's not anti-knowledge. He includes himself in the idea of knowing knowledge. It's how we apply that knowledge. And again, you can insert the idea of the difference between knowledge and wisdom here. They're not they have knowledge, but they're not exercising wisdom in how they apply that knowledge. When you thus sin against the brethren and wound their conscience, you sin against Christ. You sin against Christ because they belong to Christ, they sustain a relationship with Christ, and you are jeopardizing that relationship. And so the irony in all of this is that there were 2 groups of people. One was right and one was wrong. Now, not wrong in the sense that they're sinning, but just wrong in their understanding about the meat. And it was the people who were right that were wrong, that they were the ones sinning. The Jews, you think the Gentiles are confused. The Jews are like, wait a minute, I'm right, but I'm wrong? Yeah, you're right, but you're wrong. Because you've got this knowledge, but you're not loving. You're not using it in the proper way. And so you're the sinner in this group. And I can imagine the Jews had somehow, maybe not, but maybe twisted in their mind, well, those Gentiles are sinning because they're not eating meat, because they don't understand this. And their lack of knowledge and their weak conscience is wrong and maybe even sinful. And Paul goes, no, there's a sinner in this group, but it's you because you're in your arrogance. Therefore, if food makes my brother stumble, I will never again eat meat, lest I make my brother stumble. A strong stance that he makes here. Adam?
And I don't think that the point is dead now because we don't have idol worshiping and meats offered to idols and things. This is still, I think, a real danger for the churches of Christ, for us to have knowledge, to use that knowledge incorrectly, use that knowledge in an unloving way. I think we've all ran into people that have that, oh, you're from the Church of Christ, so that means you think I'm going to hell. I don't want to have a conversation with you. Well, because somebody sometime used their knowledge in an unloving way to that person.
Yeah.
There are things, circumstances that we are still in that position, I think, of we have the knowledge, do we have the love to use it correctly? And to bridge that gap, to help
I don't remember if I've shared this with y'all, but if I have, just pretend like you hadn't heard it yet. First full-time work I did was in a little town of South Alabama, and we were there for 3 years, just a short amount of time. But I really felt like that in those 3 years in this small town that was static, nobody ever left, nobody ever moved in, that in those 3 years we had knocked on every door in the town, small town of Brundage, Alabama. So it didn't take long to do that. But one thing I remember about that, and it's been a good lesson, is what Adam's talking about here. There was a previous member at that church by the last name of Carter. And you'd knock on some door, literally or metaphorically. Want to talk to somebody about the gospel, invite them to a gospel meeting, invite them to sign up for a correspondence course, and they'd go, "Oh, Brundage Church of Christ. Is that where Mr. Carter went?" And when they said that, I had learned enough when they would say that, I would just hang my head and say, "Yes, I'm sorry." Because he was one of those militant evangelistic, but did it in the strongest way. He would just literally knock on people's doors and say, "You're going to hell." And so he just maybe wasn't saying anything that was really incorrect, so to speak, but had done it in such an offensive way and such a loud, boisterous way that everybody in town attached that church to that man and that attitude. And he'd done so much damage. The year he was gone, he was dead by the time I got there. But him being dead yet speaketh in a negative way, that it was still that man. And again, if somebody'd say that name, and I would just go, "Oh, yeah, I'm sorry to bother you," because maybe I wouldn't go that far, but it would just feel like, okay, my work here's done. I can't. He's already done so much damage. I can't undo it in that regard. And so there's that. Somebody was right in that he knew the truth, and he was even right. He was being evangelistic about it, but was just so dead wrong. Howard.
Yeah, verse 1, you said puffed up. The American Standard uses the word arrogant,
Arrogant, yeah.
which I think is even better,
Yeah.
love it, and then he says love it. But, we need to look at that, every one of us have heard a preacher in the pulpit be preaching the truth, but bring up any specific denomination, and, they're going to hell because they are not teaching the truth. You may have someone in your audience that you've been trying to teach, and all of a sudden he hears that, "I'm not going back."
Yeah.
That's arrogance.
Yeah.
And we need to teach with love. And we all have knowledge, and the more we, the older we get, the more we study, the more knowledge we have. And it's all how you use that knowledge. It's just like Larry, the Dr. Larry of law, Larry knows a lot more about law than we do. But Larry brings things across where, you wouldn't think he did. I mean,
He hides that knowledge well, yeah.
and sometimes he may not.
Yeah, no, that's
But,
a.
We all need to have the Word of God in us in the way that when we do teach we teach with love, because if we don't, we'll turn people off.
Yeah. And you think about it, that's universal in our service to God. God doesn't only care about what we do, he cares about how we do it. Same way is true of our worship. It's not just coming in here, God wants us to sing, so I'm going to sing, and now God's been happy. Well, if I didn't sing, from the heart, it didn't please God. So it's not just doing it, it's how we do it. It's the same way with teaching the lost, interacting with our brethren. It's not just, I'm right, and so I can be this bully about it. No, God cares about you being right. He wants you to be right, but how you do it matters. Now, I think there's a bit of, I'm sorry, Mark, go ahead.
I was wondering about it, because I might have done that, and I don't know how to reconcile.
It's tough, especially if you're inclined to have that kind of personality that you just speak your mind and you're blunt. It's tough to measure that, but we have to try. And maybe the key is hidden subtly in here that there's always something. And so how would you want a doctor or a lawyer to talk to you about a subject that you don't know much about? And so I'm going to try to apply that. So try to put yourself in their shoes, by changing the scenario and think, if I went to a doctor and I had cancer, how would I want that doctor to treat me? And how would I want him to talk to me? Or if I went to a lawyer over some serious legal issue, how would I want that lawyer to treat me and talk to me? And so now I'm the doctor, I'm the lawyer, I have the truth, I know it, and now how would they want me? So that's my best understanding of that is try to yeah, yeah. And there's nothing wrong with if you can going back to somebody and say, a couple of years ago I tried to teach you the gospel, and I know now I just did that terrible, I was the wrong way, and I was hateful and blunt about it, and can you forgive me, and let's just start over and do it that way maybe. So, all right, we'll pick up there with chapter 9 next time.